Hello everyone, welcome to Dnyanadeep Academy. In this session, we are going to do trend analysis and we'll see strategy for UPSC Geography Prelims section. So we'll understand last 10 years question pattern. We will try to understand what has been the psyche of UPSC and we'll try to know what are the requirements for the preparation of UPSC Prelims 2024 Geography section. In this particular charts, I have compiled last 10 years question papers and tried to bring in some meaningful data out of those particular question papers. One by one we will see what are the major areas on which there have been questions in last 10 years. We will also try to identify what are the micro topics within those particular areas which have been repeatedly asked and which have a possibility of being asked in 2024 and onwards. And finally, we will do one analysis on UPSC 2023 Geography section, because if you see 2023 paper, that has been totally different from what we have had till 2022. And so, we will try to bring in some meaning out of that as well, so that we are very well prepared for our upcoming 2024 examination. So with these charts, we will understand what has been the exact trend. So my timeline for this particular part is from 2023 to 2013. Now, if I look at overall questions, what have been asked, I have categorized them in different categories. I'll just show you what are the categories I have made here. Overall, in last 10 years, we had around 167 questions. These 167 questions are from geography and agriculture. Now, there can be many analyses where agriculture has been made a part of environment, but typically I have found that these agricultural questions make more sense when they are clubbed with geography. There are some agriculture questions which also come from economics perspective, so those questions I have left aside and I have only focused on agriculture questions which can have their fundamentals or basics in the geography part, right? So in total we have 167 questions in last 10 years. Now if we look at questions asked on each and every single section, so I have sections here: agriculture, India mapping, India resources, climatology, world mapping, oceanography, miscellaneous parts, geography basics and geomorphology as well. Fine. So overall, these are my sections in which I have clubbed all these issues. Look at this particular chart. Here you can see what has been the area on which maximum number of questions have appeared. So if I look at these numbers, in last 10 years, maximum number of questions are on mapping part of Indian geography. So even in mapping part, we will try to understand which are the focus areas. So later on, we will do micro analysis of these topics as well. But when I take a broader view of last 10 years question, I do find that India mapping part has had the maximum number of questions. Followed by India mapping, I have agriculture section. After that, Indian resources, world mapping, climatology, some fundamentals or basics of geography. Then I have some questions on oceanography, very few questions on geomorphology. Then there are some miscellaneous questions which cannot be clubbed in any of these, and there have been one or two questions on resources which are found across the world. Fine. So these are the broad areas on which there have been questions in last 10 years. Now, when we are discussing these broad areas, suggestion is simply not that you should be only preparing these broad areas or whatever topics on which there have been questions. The only suggestion with this analysis we are trying to provide that we are able to understand the psyche of UPSC and you should be able to effectively prepare your subject in a way that you will have maximum output with minimum possible input, right? So that is the only attempt we are trying to achieve here, nothing else. Now, let's look at number of questions. If I go for last 10 years question, I have 42 questions on India mapping wala part, some 39 questions on agriculture. So you can see a major chunk of questions for your prelims geography and agriculture section. It comes from these two areas, Indian geography, and typically map based questions are there. And then I have questions on agriculture wala part. Further, I have questions on resources. Surprisingly, this is the neglected part. By and large, we do not get to see that there are questions on resources. If you follow standard material, even they do not focus so much on resources. Or if you go through question papers, these resources questions are not as highlighted as are other questions. But you can very well see this is one of the section which is very important for UPSC Prelims geography subject. Further, we have questions on world mapping also. A good number of questions have appeared in this world mapping section. Every year you will have 2 or 3 questions which are coming from world mapping. Then I have some climatology sections. Now, when it comes to climatology, the kind of questions which have been asked in last few years, they are demanding a certain level of conceptual clarity or certain level of conceptual understanding, right? So they are not simply factual questions which might appear in other sections of the paper. They are the questions which require a deep understanding of climatological phenomena. Fine. Further, we have a few questions on oceanography, some questions on geography basics, and further I have some miscellaneous questions. So this is the broader trend which we have when it comes to last 10 years paper. Now let's dig in deeper and try to understand what all we have to prepare when it comes to all these topics. So if I am talking about mapping part of India, look at the focus of UPSC. Now on mapping part, maximum mapping based questions on Indian geography, they have come from Indian rivers. If you do Indian rivers wala part very well, so definitely you will be able to attempt a good number of questions every year. Then followed by Indian rivers, we have to be very careful with hill ranges. There are many questions which have appeared from hill ranges section. Then there are some general mapping questions. Maybe some states have been asked, or route from one place to another place. These kind of questions have been asked in this particular section. Then we have good number of questions on lakes also. Islands, a few questions on islands, not as much of emphasis you will find when it comes to islands. Transport, some mapping and transport based questions are there. Some regions of India have been asked. A few dams have been asked. There have been questions on wetlands also. Then glaciers, places in news, and these type of questions you will find in India mapping section. Further, we'll go to agriculture. If I talk about agriculture, I have good number of questions on crops. So every year you will find one or the other crop which is being asked in the paper. Agriculture technology. Again, most of the people prepare this particular part in science and technology and do not think that these technology wala questions can be asked from the geography perspective as well. So you will also have questions not just from science and technology perspective in agri-tech, but there will be questions from geography perspective when it comes to agricultural technologies. There have been quite a few questions on agricultural schemes. Good number of questions on soils, good number of questions on agriculture inputs. Now when I say agriculture input, here I am talking about fertilizers, here I am talking about irrigation. All these issues are covered when it comes to agriculture input. I also have quite a few agronomy questions, that is some economy part of agriculture, which is then clubbed with geography part, right? So I'm not taking all the agronomy questions in this consideration. I'm just focusing on those questions which also showing some basics of geography, or where we find that geography as a subject is reflected in this particular question. Then there are questions on agriculture organizations. If there is any crop which is in news, that also has been asked, and then there are some miscellaneous questions. So from agriculture section, major focus which I have to have will be all the crops and agri-tech, right? So these are the key areas. Other than that, be prepared very well with schemes, soils, and agriculture inputs. Moving next, I have Indian resources. Now when we talk about the resources part in India, majority of the questions have appeared on energy resources of India. Fine. In our upcoming series on PYQs, we will definitely deliberate more over this particular section, ki what areas from Indian resources or energy resources have been a point of focus for UPSC. So we'll discuss that part also. Then we have good number of questions on forest resources. Again, when it comes to forest resources, this is the part which is not as highlighted. It is important. Every year you will find one or the other question when it comes to forest resources. But sometimes this particular section is neglected by candidates, and you'll also find that good number of questions are there on forest resources. Then there are some miscellaneous resources. You have metals. Again, if you look at the recent trends of questions, there have been questions on metals, water resources, marine resources, again climate, vegetation and soils. Those have been some resource based questions when it comes to Indian resources. Now, hot topic, that is world mapping. So there are candidates who are facing a lot of problems to prepare these particular questions. They are not able to very precisely prepare this particular part, and they are also not able to effectively recollect in the exam hall, right? And this particular section is of world mapping. But if you look at the trends, right, so it's not at random which is being asked in the paper. Fine. So if I go through last 10 years question, what I find, most of the questions have been on Middle East, and that is also the region of Middle East which has been in news. So I have made two separate categories. Okay, rather I had to make separate categories because when I analyzed all those papers, what did I find? There were a good number of questions on Middle East. I have two categories, only Middle East and region in news. Middle East, right? So obviously major questions are on regions in news, whatever regions all across the globe, they are being asked. But again, even if I further categorize that particular section, what I find, I have majority of the questions which are coming from Middle East wala part. Fine. So region in news, Middle East. So whatever regions in Middle East they are in news, you should be thorough with that because there have been maximum number of questions on that particular part. Other than that, mapping questions for world geography, they are coming from other regions which are in news. There are some world features, ikka dukka questions you will find on world features, some question on neighborhood. There can be again static questions on Middle East. Now, one particular area which is emerging in world mapping or world geography, that is Africa. So in last few years, we have found that there has been good number of questions which are coming from this particular section, Africa wala part, which earlier not used to be the case. And again, overall, if you look at the global trends, Africa is in news time and again, and that could be the reason that Africa might become a focus here onwards. Similarly, Central Asia is one of the emerging topics we see in world mapping. Fine. So this was about world mapping. Now there are some minor issues which have been asked in last few years. So when it comes to climatology, so good number of questions, they are a combination of climate and vegetation. Okay, so whatever questions we have from climatology, they are a combination of climate and vegetation. Further, I have some fundamental concepts which have been asked from climatology. And finally, I also have a few questions on winds and various atmospheric disturbances. Now, when I say various atmospheric disturbances, I'm talking about tropical cyclones, temperate cyclones, so on and so forth. Further, I have oceanography. In oceanography, good number of questions on ocean currents. So that is one obvious part from oceanography which needs to be asked. Then there are some questions on ocean water properties. And finally, I have quite a few questions on ocean resources, right? So overall, if I look at the theme, resources wala part is becoming more and more important as we are in 21st century. So that is why you will find that there have been good number of questions on Indian resources, and there have been questions on ocean resources or world resources here onwards as well. Fine. So that was for oceanography. Further, if I talk about some geography basics and geomorphology, so maybe before 2022 or 2021, there were rarely any static geomorphology kind of questions, right? But in 2023, we had a very static kind of questions, which was really a surprise. So we'll see what that question was, and then again we'll try to interpret why that particular question was asked, and what should be our strategy to tackle with these areas here onwards. Fine. So that was a brief overview of last 10 years questions, and we have seen with micro topics on what areas UPSC has been focusing. Right now, once we have understood the areas on which UPSC has been focusing, so we have got to understand what UPSC must be thinking. When I'm saying there have been good number of questions on resources, so definitely there must be certain reason, because if you look at all around, you'll find that there has been a scarcity of resources all over the world, and that could be the perspective of UPSC, and that is why UPSC is asking more and more question on India resources, or even the world resources. Similarly, as we see a good number of questions on agriculture, so agriculture time and again it remains a hot topic, right? And that is why you will find a good number of questions are coming from agriculture wala part. Similarly, when it comes to mapping, rivers are most important. Again, I can link this particular part to that of some contemporary issues and current issues which are continually emerging, issues such as water resources, issues such as the river dispute, right? So could be the reason, that is why we have good number of questions on Indian rivers. But once we understand this particular micro topic level analysis of all last 10 years questions, we need to implement all these identifications or all these observations in our preparation. So whenever you are preparing, keep in mind that what has been the focus of UPSC, and once you have that particular thing in mind, you will be having better understanding of whatever you are reading. At the same time, your strategy will also be very well shaped, because you will not be reading things at random. You would be reading with a certain objective which is based on previous year questions analysis, right? So that is why this analysis is important. Now we will talk about one more topic, that is what you are supposed to read when it comes to preparation of UPSC Prelims geography part. Now there is no Bible for this particular section. For maybe polity you can read Lakshmikant. For economy you have some Bible like book. For let's say modern history you have Spectrum, right? So for many other subjects you have one single book which you can follow thoroughly, and your preparation limits up to that particular book only. But when it comes to geography, you will very well find that there is no single book which will cater to your demand. That is why it is very difficult to suggest a single book. At the same time, when I suggest many books, it definitely comes at the cost. You will spend a lot of time into it, and there is no guarantee that you will be having maximum output through those multiple resources. And that is why we are just going to keep our book list very simple, very short. So what should be our focus? Our focus should be NCERTs of 11th and 12th standard. Even in that, do 11th NCERTs well, fundamentals of physical geography and India physical environment. Once you are done with that, move on to another standard reference, that is GC Leong. So you can very well choose to read GC Leong from first page to last page. That can be also a strategy, but have a better approach. Now once you have done physical geography fundamental NCERT, there is not as such a need to go through physical geography part of GC Leong as well. So better you can focus on human geography part of GC Leong, right? And that will give you wonderful insights on human geography, and that will be very well reflected in your UPSC geography paper as well, right? So These are the standard references you are supposed to go forward to. Other than that, you also have to follow some atlas for mapping. Now when it comes to atlas, prefer Oxford student atlas. You might be having 36th or 37th edition, whatever latest edition you have, pick that. Now when I talk about mapping section, again simply suggesting atlas is not sufficient. What I am also expecting that you will put some effort from your side. Try to understand what is going in contemporary affairs, right? I'm not saying just current affairs. When I'm saying current affairs, you will pick some magazine and you will see what are the places in news. So that will work, right? But that is not a 100% solution of the problems you are going to face or the problems you might face in exam hall. If you look at the questions of last few years, typically post 2018 questions, what do we find? We find that a good number of questions are now coming from contemporary affairs. Contemporary affairs are the issues which have been in news maybe for last several years, right? So focus on those contemporary issues. Try to understand in which regions you have issues which are emerging. Also try to understand which regions might also throw up some surprises and some issues. And with this understanding, with this reading, you will be in a better position to do these mapping questions well, right? And mapping is something you will have to do on your own, right? Obviously, someone might teach you. Obviously, someone will provide you the material. But when it comes to mapping that particular place on the paper and in your mind, that particular exercise requires effort from your side, right? Merely watching videos, merely reading some books is not going to be sufficient for mapping wala part, right? Try to do that exercise by your own. Follow each and every single detail in those maps. Like we will have some sessions on how to tackle mapping, right? So in that particular session, we'll again divulge details, what needs to be done, okay? But the underline here is, or the fundamental point here is that you will need to take effort, right? So that is about mapping. And when it comes to rest of the part of the syllabus, which you are going to cover from 11th, 12th NCERT and GC Leong, again try to make sure that your concepts are 100% clear. Okay, so what will happen, these NCERTs or even GC Leong, it might not provide you a particular concept in totality. It might just refer, a very shallow reference would be there, and if you limit your understanding to that reference only, it might prove detrimental in the exam hall if there is a question which is demanding certain level of detail, and in that particular case you end up faltering on a particular question. Fine. So that is why I'm saying that go for conceptual understanding. Whatever points which are given here, make sure that you are having 100% conceptual understanding of those parts, right? So that was about the book list you are supposed to follow. Now we will see next part in which we will analyze 2023 geography questions. So now we'll see what has been the trend in 2023 paper. So we'll go question by question and try to understand what was the logic UPSC tried to apply when it asked these particular questions. Now there is first question. I'm not going to discuss the answer of these questions. I'm just going to highlight what has been the psyche of UPSC in 2023, or what is certainly going to change here onwards. So that is something we need to be very careful. So this is a question in which we have lakes. We also have been given rivers, right? Now, if you look at this question, is it a new type of question? No. If you follow through previous year questions, there have been quite a few questions on rivers and lake or rivers and wetland. If I look at this Buller Lake, Kolleru Lake, right? What is this? This is wetland. Cover Lake. This is wetland. Now, again, if I diverge into detail, I find that this is a contemporary issue. One of the recently added wetland to the Ramsar list, that is Cover Lake. But when it comes to the nature of question, look at the nature of question. Many will know what Buller Lake is, where Kolleru Lake is, or what wetlands are created by Jhelum and Krishna River. But if you have not been thorough with the contemporary affairs, maybe that is what I was saying. Merely current affairs is not sufficient. Sometimes you will have to go beyond those current affairs and you'll have to identify what have been the major news in last 2-3 years at least. So I have question from there on cover lake. Okay, and look at the nature. It is asking about a specific detail of cover lake. If I look at questions prior to this particular paper, what do I find? Had there been questions on these specific details, rarely you will find that a particular question is asking this kind of specific detail, and typically you will find that this particular question has asked some geomorphology kind of detail, right? So what do I learn? So whatever features or whatever lakes, rivers or whatnot I am going to study here onwards, merely shallow understanding of that particular part is not going to be sufficient. I will certainly need to go into its detail, because here even your elimination technique is not going to work, right? The kind of options we have, so definitely we need to know specifically what is correct and what is not correct. And when even with that type of option you are being asked a specific geomorphological feature of a wetland, right? So what does that tell you? It tells you you have to prepare things here onwards in detail. Now it's not a new topic. A question on rivers and wetlands is not new. It has also been there earlier, but what has changed? The level of detail which is being asked has been changed. Okay, so that is something I will focus here onwards. I'll take next question. Look at this particular question. There is a Kamraj Port, Mundra Port, Visakhapatnam Port in one column, and in another column there have been some details on that particular port. Now, do you see some similarity? If I look at the previous question was also asking about the detail. In this particular question, it is also asking me on the details of those ports, right? Now, if I go into previous year questions, what was the nature of previous year questions? You will find that there would be question on a port and state. There would be question which port is on east coast or west coast. There could be question which is natural harbor, which is artificial port, right? So those were the angles through which questions were being asked. Again, one more change I find here: majority of the questions which have been asked on ports, they were on a major port, right? But if I look into this Mundra port, which is a privately owned port, so definitely there must be some logic why UPSC is asking this type of question, or why UPSC is going now beyond major ports and also asking questions on minor ports. The fundamental logic is, if you look at the logistics sector, or if you look at the transport sector in India, it has going through a churning. A lot of churning is there, and good number of capacity of ports now is being held by privately operated ports, and there is a specific entity which I don't need to mention here, but you'll find key private ports are also becoming very, very important in India's transport and logistics sector, and that is the fundamental reason why this particular question has been asked in 2023. By the way, 2023 is also the year when Mundra port completes 25 years. Okay, so just understand how there is a combination of current affairs and contemporary trends. So whatever contemporary trends I have in a particular topic, I have to catch it, and accordingly I have to prepare for it. Then I have this very static question. By the way, if you look at this question, any standard textbook reference will help you with this question. So definitely you have to build basics as well. You have to be thorough with static part of your syllabus. So that is something again I want to highlight. When I go to next question, look at this particular question again, asking sufficient amount of detail, but with certain amount of logic. Again, you can attempt this particular question, right? So there is a question on like India has more arable area than China. The proportion of irrigated area is more in India compared to China. So if you look at the problems of agriculture in India, so you will very well understand why this particular question is being asked. What is the nature of irrigation in India? if you are thorough with that particular part, with certain amount of logic, you can be attempting this particular question. So certainly logic hasn't gone anywhere. So there will still be some questions which can be attempted logically, but that logic needs to be built on a very strong foundation of knowledge. Fine. So if I look at the terms also, or the issues which have been highlighted here, there is an issue of irrigation which is being discussed. We very well know what is the status of irrigation in India. There is an issue of productivity, which is again a very contemporary issue, and there you will find that there are a lot of discussions on the productivity of crops in India. So from somewhere that particular angle, I find this particular question has been asked. Moving next. So there is a question on repeated falls in sea level, which particular region is showing repeated fall in sea level. If you have had basics of Indian physiography read very well, you will definitely know answer to this particular question, but I'll just tell you some more detail on what went when it comes to the options. If you look at all three options, the answer definitely is none, of course, so that is not the thing I'm going to discuss. But if I go through these options, what do I know? Bhitarkanika mangroves, everyone knows. Even this year, I find that options are being framed from current affairs. When we talk about Marakkanam salt pans or Nopada swamps, if you do reverse Google search, you will find that both of these have featured in Hindu in 2022. Okay, so one more pick I have for preparation here onwards, that your current affairs issues might not be the answer, but they will also be in the options, right? So we'll be mindful of that as well. Look at this question: ilmenite and rutile, which is a ore of titanium. Now you might be wondering why suddenly UPSC is talking about titanium. Again, look at the contemporary issues. What are the metals which are continuously in news? Look at the technology, how it is changing. We are increasingly moving towards electric vehicle technology. We are also adopting semiconductors at a very rapid pace, and for all these technologies you are requiring some new resources which were not required prior to 10 years or 20 years or so. Okay, so titanium is such a resource. Similarly, I have lithium, titanium, gold, so on and so forth, and definitely then I will have, or I should expect, a question on these type of resources. So just make a list of what are the recent resources or recent material which is being used in various processes and various part of our life, and definitely we will have one or the other question on that particular part. Look at this particular question. Again, a combination of static and some contemporary affairs. So there is mention of Amarkantak Hills. We know where Amarkantak Hills are. Bilgiri Rangan Hills. Okay, now Bilgiri Rangan was in news, current affairs, okay, in 2022, but when it comes to Seshachalam, this was also in news in, let's say, 2022 or even 2021, and the fundamental reason for this particular part to be in news, there was very hit movie which was released, which is somewhere set in this particular condition. So again, look at the nature of question. I have static knowledge, but that is being inspired from contemporary and current affairs. Now this is one more change I am experiencing in 2023. What has been asked? So first statement is regarding the soil in tropical rainforests is rich in nutrients, and then there are certain conditions which have been provided. What is leading to this type of enrichment? Now, if I look at questions on soils prior to this particular paper, those questions were typically asking about soils and the regions in which you will find these soils, right? So that has been traditional way in which questions were asked on soils, but now onwards I have to prepare details on their formation, right? So if you look at this particular statement is expecting you to know details of the particular soil and typically detail on the formation of that particular soil. Okay, so again, one more understanding I'm developing on this particular part. Moving next, again going back to basics wala philosophy of UPSC. Every single time you will find that UPSC will not leave the fundamentals, will not leave the basic. And if you look at this particular question, this is a very fundamental concept which has been asked, right? So underline is keep prepare your fundamentals, prepare your basics very well. And that is why I said what is going to matter, concepts. If you have thorough conceptual understanding, when will you develop this thorough conceptual understanding? When you are prepared with fundamentals, or when you are prepared with basic part, then only you are going to develop thorough understanding, or you will be thorough with concept. So that is something I'm going to draw from this particular question. Look at this question. That was a surprise. By and large, if I look at the trends of UPSC, what I find that UPSC does not ask many questions on geomorphology, and even if it is asking questions on geomorphology, the nature of question on geomorphology is very contemporary or very dynamic, right? But here I have a typical static question, right? But maybe there is some logic also. UPSC is asking this question. We had Turkey earthquake in March of 2023, right at the beginning of 2023 we had this particular earthquake, and maybe from somewhere that earthquake we had this particular question, but maybe that is the reason. But one more reading I'm taking from here, that I should be very thorough with the static part. At least whatever is there in current affairs and whatever static part which is associated with that particular current affairs, I should be thorough with that. So that is the learning I'm going to take from this particular question. Look at this coal-based thermal power plant. This is a very repetitive theme. Okay, so if you look at the questions on Indian resources, energy resources or mineral resources, you will find that there have been good number of questions on energy resources, be it coal, be it shale gas, methane or petroleum, or even uranium and thorium. So you'll find questions typically going on these areas, and there is a logic also, because continually we are having a excessive very high demand of energy resources. Again, you have now discussion on transitioning from traditional resources to cleaner resources, and all these contemporary happenings or these contemporary events are prompting questions on these particular areas. Again, I will make a list of what are the contemporary issues when it comes to energy resources, and definitely upcoming questions will certainly lie from those particular topics only, right? Moving next, again a very basic part. Time and again I am telling you that UPSC wants you to read basic concepts and static part very well, and that is why UPSC is throwing these type of questions. Again, same thing, energy resources, you have question on uranium. Definitely I am expecting more questions on uranium or a resource other than coal, which is a cleaner resource. Reason being, we have to transition from fossil fuels, right? And then what are the alternatives? So certainly if we have to scale up our energy production, somewhere uranium or nuclear energy will be the fundamental thing which lies here. So definitely you should be careful about these particular questions. Look at one more question. Now when I look at 2023 question, I find that transport segment or transport topic is now becoming more and more important. Again, if you read current affairs, everywhere you will find that there are good number of questions or there are good number of issues which are emerging from transport sector, and definitely from somewhere that particular logic only I have this particular question. So read current affairs well and highlight issues. Next, this is something which was in news. Okay, directly from down to earth, this particular issue appeared I guess in 2022. There is one issue of down to earth in 2022, and in that particular issue there was discussion on this particular topic and direct lines have been picked from that particular issue. So that is my further identification that what are the timelines from which UPSC is going to ask questions. So this doesn't mean that you should leave aside all the current affairs of this year and jump back to last year's current affairs. I'm not suggesting simply that. I'm simply suggesting ki prepare this year's current affairs very well, but also if possible, if you have time, try to read some of the other current affairs from last few years or whatever important current affairs you come across, maybe last year or last to last year, have a good understanding of that. There is this question again, new topic, new area, I would say. There have been like key concepts given, Cepheids, nebula, pulsars. Again, fundamentals of astronomical geography, this particular part is. If you go for question papers before 2010, so you will find good number of questions on these particular issues, or these type of questions were very well present in there. After that, we do not find as many questions on these particular areas, but again, basics or static issues are being highlighted by UPSC. So this was obvious question, so I don't need to divulge a lot of detail, but just understand the question, region in news and what it is bordering. So this type of question has been repeated. If I go back to 2021, there was one question on Afghanistan, which are the countries which are bordering Afghanistan. So that kind of questions I'm able to recall. And now in 2023, I have question on Ukraine. Same type of question again. So just identify which area might be asked this year or maybe here onwards. Further, I have one more question on basic. So again, I am telling you time and again, basics are more important. Again, when it comes to this particular issue, this is not current affairs of 2023. This is somewhere from 2021. Okay, 2021-22 timeline. If you go for these current affairs, you will find direct reference to this particular issue. So there were again articles in Hindu highlighting how African Union has suspended a few countries which were in news. So from that particular news article, you will find that this question has been asked. Moving further, we have again question on gold. Again, you will be surprised why there is a suddenly question on gold, and that too, this particular question is asking about global reserves of gold. If you look at the whole timeline post 2020, what do you find? You find that there is economic crisis everywhere, and when there is economic crisis, which is the asset which is demanded the most? It is the gold which is demanded the most. So that is one logic from where I have this particular question. But then there is another logic from technology also. If you look at semiconductor technologies or whatever electronics we use, so the connectors or the connections which we find in those electronics, again, they have gold as a component, and that is why gold is very important in contemporary affairs. And from that logic, I have this question. Further, these are the regions which were in news continuously for last 1 or 2 years, and I certainly don't need to divulge more details on this particular question, because this type of questions have been there earlier also. So certainly that is not changing. By the way, I've made a mistake. The explanation I provided for that food crisis wala question, actually that news article related to this particular issue. Okay, so Chad, Guinea, Mali and Sudan. So there was article in the Hindu in 2022 on how African Union has suspended some of these countries because of the political issues which are happening there. So from that particular article directly, I find this particular question has been asked. Fine. So that was all about the reading of 2023 paper. We try to understand what UPSC is trying to do. So I have 2-3 identifications here. First and foremost, UPSC is going back to static and fundamental concept, right? So that is one important area you need to understand. Learning number 2, whatever we are reading, we need to be very mindful. We need to go deeper. merely shallow reading is not going to be sufficient here onwards. So look at the initial questions I have showed you. So everywhere a specific detail is being expected. So whatever preparation you are going to do here onwards should ensure that sufficient details have been achieved. Reading number 3, current affairs needs to be done very well, right? They need to be integrated with the syllabus. At the same time, if possible, if time permits, try to identify which are the contemporary issues, make a list of those contemporary issues and try to understand those issues, so that if there is a question on those contemporary issues, you are in a better position to attempt these questions. Okay, so that was my understanding of 2023 paper, and that is how I'm going to approach for 2024 examination. So we'll see you in next sessions where we will further decode UPSC prelims for 2024. Thank you everyone.